the previous 20 years prior to being here this last year, I was out of the area and lived most of that time down in south of Nashville, and raised our three kids, our three adult children, 32, 30, and 26. And so we've been back here just for a little bit. And since about 20 years ago, I got real interested in the American Civil War. Started collecting Civil War letters of soldiers and documents, original letters, original documents and diaries and images and things like that. And then ended up finding out all, probably not all, but I found out quite a few of my ancestors were in the Civil War, as probably many of you, if you haven't done the research yet, if you did, you would probably find that you have a lot of ancestors who fought in the Civil War. And so when I moved back a little bit over a year ago, since the previous 20 years, I'd spent a lot of time researching and writing on the Civil War and speaking on it. And I decided that, I need to get a better handle on what was, I knew Jeffersonville, of course, there wasn't a battle in Jeffersonville, if you will. There wasn't a battle in New Albany, but the closest thing we could call to a battle in Hoosier soil, of course, is the Battle of Corden. But notwithstanding, action, military action, conflict taking place, there was a tremendous amount of Civil War history going on in southern Indiana. And in the last year, I've been specifically focusing on southern Indiana as centered on Jeffersonville and New Albany, so Clark County and Floyd County, with a little bit of bleeding over into some other counties. But what I've done in the last 6 months is I found digital copy, found access to the New Albany Daily Ledger during the Civil War, and it was printed usually 5 to 6 days a week during the Civil War, and you can access the ledger online from that time. And so I have literally gone through every issue. I've read most of the time. The paper is 4 to 5 pages, usually 4 pages at that time. Page 2 is the page where if there was something going on more locally in Jeffersonville or New Albany, or even Scottsburg, Madison, whatever, the ledger would talk about it on page 2. So if you do yourself some research, really focus on page 2. Sometimes there's some information on page 1, but it's almost always page 2. So I read through every single issue of the New Albany Daily Ledger for 4 years during the Civil War, and made notes and saved information and archived and collected every single mention of anything related to Jeffersonville that was of significant importance related to the Civil War, as well as New Albany. And I actually did that 4 times. I read through the New Albany Daily Ledger during the Civil War for 4 different times to make sure I found as much as I could. So that's what this presentation is based on. I'm going to try and, there are quite a few slides. I'm going to try and get through the slides as quickly as possible, but bear with me. There are going to be some times when we stop at a slide for maybe a minute, and other times we're just going to breeze right through. So the image, I think everyone can see, I have my slide deck up. The image on the right, the Great War Meeting, that is an actual image from the New Albany Daily Ledger when they would publish that a meeting, a Great War Meeting, if you will, was going to take place down at the public square in New Albany. So let's just move along here. So first of all, I'm just going to establish the setting. So by the way, this is Civil War Jeffersonville, not Jeffersonville in the Civil War. There's a difference. What I'm doing is I'm trying to help you understand what was Jeffersonville, what was the what was Civil War Jeffersonville like? I you know, so I'm focusing on, you know, the periods 1861, 65, and I'm just paying attention to information that I found in the newspapers that helped understand the role that Jeffersonville played in the Civil War. So the setting. So in April 1861, the Cincinnati newspaper in April 23. Of course, the war begins, you know, in mid-April, and so the Cincinnati newspaper says that there's a movement on foot and will probably be adopted in a day or two between the civilian and military authorities of Louisville, Jeffersonville, and New Albany to prevent any invasion by hostile troops from the north or south, so long as Kentucky preserves her present status. So a couple things of note here is that number one is Jeffersonville is as a, in order to understand Civil War Jeffersonville, you really need to understand Civil War Louisville as well as Civil War New Albany. And so I actually have presentations on each of those cities. And this one, of course, is Jeffersonville. And one of the first things to remember is that so let's ask the question, you know, what is the strategic importance of Jeffersonville, of Civil War Jeffersonville? What is the strategic importance? Number one, as we all know, it's the southern border of Jeffersonville follows the Ohio River. At this time, Kentucky's officially neutral. And Jeffersonville also is a direct link to Nashville via the L&N Railroad. I believe the L&N Railroad is built around 1855. And so there's a direct link between Nashville and the L&N via Jeffersonville. And some of you may be familiar with this very famous statement by Abraham Lincoln, who said, "I hope to have God on my side, but I must have Kentucky. I think to lose Kentucky is nearly the same as to lose the whole game." Advance my slide here. So let's look at the strategic location. You can see the white circle around basically what we know today as Kentuckiana, if you will. You see the Ohio River winding its way on the top of the screen. So you can see where New Albany and Louisville and Jeffersonville is right there. Obviously, New Albany and Jeffersonville would not have had nearly the import and the impact during the Civil War had it not been right across from Louisville. And we'll talk about that in the presentation. But there's the strategic location, and you can see the L&N Railroad runs right straight from Louisville down south into Nashville. Let's talk about access to railroads for just a minute. Here's a period map. And again, I highlighted the Jeffersonville area, but you can see Floyd County there and Clark County. And these are the railroads. So you can see all the railroads in this map. You see the blue that focuses in the southeastern part, you know, Gibson County and Warwick and Spencer, Perry, Crawford, Dubois, so on and so forth. And then you see Harrison, Floyd right there, and then Clark. And then the counties of Orange, Washington, and Jefferson, as well as Scott, those are all really considered Southern Indiana counties. When you read documents, when you see articles in the paper, those counties are often, if a story is written about Floyd County or written about Washington County, they almost always will tell you something as well about some of those other southern counties that I just described there. But that shows you the arteries of the railroads at that time. I want to emphasize that Jeffersonville was a nerve center. Because of its connections with the Mississippi and other western rivers, the Ohio became a primary supply channel for the Western theater. The Civil War was, let me stop here for a minute. The United States was sort of divided for the purposes of understanding the war theaters. It was divided into the Eastern Theater, which is primarily the eastern seaboard, So obviously, Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania, and then all the states on the eastern seaboard north there. But then the Western Theater is obviously going to be, to the west of the Eastern Theater, and the Western Theater is going to be, the Rust Belt states that we know of as today, and including Kentucky. Kentucky is often considered in the Western Theater, although some people put Kentucky in the Southern Theater, or the Confederate area. Kentucky was, of course, a border state, and we'll refer to that again here shortly. But and then you have the Trans-Mississippi Theater, which of course is what the territories and states that are going to, of course, be west of the Mississippi River. So my point here is that Jeffersonville, because of the Ohio River, it becomes a primary supply channel for the entire Western Theater, which is a major portion of the war theater. There's a lot of debate between historians. Was the war won or lost in the Eastern Theater or the Western Theater? Of course, people from the Eastern Theater say it was lost in the Eastern Theater. People in the Western Theater say it was lost, depending what side someone wants to, whether they want to say lost or won. But Jeffersonville's position is at the head of the falls, as we all know, and its proximity to Louisville, the northern terminus of the Louisville National Railroad. And this made it a nerve center for logistical operations at the southern end of the state. So Jeffersonville, and really New Albany, Jeffersonville, particularly, and Madison, are just a major logistical nerve center for the Western Theater. So let's look specifically now at Jeffersonville in 1860. Of course, Jeffersonville is much smaller than at that time, roughly 4,000 population. Today, it's about 48. There are several military units that are formed from Clark County, or served from Clark County, including predominantly, or of major note, the 49th Indiana, the 23rd, these are infantries, the 49th Indiana Infantry, the 23rd Indiana Infantry, Company B. In fact, Company B of the 23rd, a company was around 100 men at the beginning when they were formed. The entire company of Company B is all from Clark County. And then the 12th Light Artillery, is another major unit that is raised or formed in Clark County. And then Jeffersonville, as you can imagine, there was lots of riverboat activity and therefore capabilities that Jeffersonville could provide to the war effort for the Union. I want to talk, here's a map. My fonts are covering that map information, but that is a map from 1878. And you can see in the, for a minute, everything to the left of the red circle is at that in 1878 is what Jeffersonville is made up of. It is, constitutes the streets and what Jeffersonville is made up of. So we see, you can see all the streets in the blue here with the boundaries here. That's Jeffersonville at the time. Just on on this map, it's going to be at about the 2 o'clock position. You see Port Fulton. Port Fulton today is part of Jeffersonville, but it was not technically part of Jeffersonville in terms of it was not annexed at that time. So Port Fulton existed just northeast of Jeffersonville and bordered Jeffersonville. And we're going to talk about Port Fulton. Of course, you can go today and drive right over there at Port Fulton, and you'll see where that is here in a second. Here's a blow up of it. You see some of the streets. I'm sure I'm confident many of the street names have changed, but you see Market flows into Port Fulton. And again, this is what it looked like. This is how it was architected. The streets were architected at that time. So let's talk about Port Fulton's history for just a moment. Jesse D. Bright is the gentleman on the left. He was a senator, if I recall. I think he was a senator And he was from southern Indiana, and his estate was he had a fairly decent sized estate, and his estate was part of what was the old Port Fulton area. As well, there's a mention, I'll show you in a second, there's a mention of a camp known as Camp Andy Johnson. And Camp Andy Johnson was a campground on the in the Port Fulton area. And then, of course, many of you probably know that the Jefferson General Hospital, this historical marker exists over there. We're going to talk about, we're definitely going to peel that back a little bit and look at it here in just a second. But the Jefferson General Hospital was all part of that, was also on part of that land at that time known as Port Fulton. So I referenced Camp Andy Johnson. I found a letter that I purchased. This was written in December '61, and this is a gentleman with, I think he's from Pennsylvania, if I recall. He's in the Pennsylvania Cavalry. And he says, "Dear parents, I now hasten to let you know where and how we are. We're now laying at Jeffersonville. We're just at the outskirts of the town." And he's talking about Port Fulton. "We encamped on the farm of Jesse D. Bright, late senator from this state, but now a prisoner at Fortress Monroe for his sea-sesh principles. Our camp is just opposite from the Louisville Waterworks and close to the Ohio River." Jesse Bright, he mentions there. Remember, I had him there in that slide. That's him on the left. He was living, of course, in southern Indiana here in Jeffersonville, but he became outspoken in some of his support for, according to this soldier, sea-sesh principles. And so that earned him an invitation by the federal government to be escorted to Fortress Monroe as a prisoner. And to my knowledge, he's the only sitting senator from the North, if you will, that was put into prison because of his political beliefs. Let's talk about Jefferson Hospital. I mentioned that you've probably seen this image before. This is Jefferson Hospital. It wasn't opened until February, I think it's either February or January of '64, but this is what it looked like, and we're gonna talk about that. This was on that property, on the Port Fulton property. But let's just real quickly, let me hit some design features. It was built in a circular design. You can see the circular design there. It's like spokes on a wheel. It had 25 wards, 176 feet long for each ward, 21 feet wide. Most of it, 150 feet of that 176 were for the patients. The other part were for the doctors and nurses and stewards. There were many support buildings that were built with this facility, including laundry, a blacksmith shop, and it was on the bluff overlooking the Ohio River. And that bluff where it was built was the Jesse D. Bright estate. So again, what happened is Jesse Bright expressed opinions that cost him his estate, and the federal government said, "Well, thank you very much. We could use your land." And so that's where Jefferson General Hospital was built, and it opened February 24, 1864. I found another letter, and I have this letter in this picture. I really like this one. Here's a soldier's view of the Ohio River from the hospital. So this is Franklin Whitney of the 36th Illinois. And I believe he writes this after the Battle of Franklin, Tennessee, which was fought in November '64. And he's in hospital ward number 17 at Jefferson General Hospital. And he says, "Our hospital is situated on the banks of the Ohio River, so I can sit and watch the boats play up and down the river. Sometimes there are as many as 20 to be seen at a time. Last night, they looked very pretty with their lamps all lit up." So that's a picture of him much, much later in life in his uniform. Well, here it is. Here is a picture of where Port Fulton is today. Of course, you can see it's right there on the river. You've got the area that I believe that was probably all part of Jeff Boat back in the day. And you see the Howard Steamboat Museum over on the right. And then I superimposed a picture of Jefferson General Hospital there, as you can see. Again, that same location, before it became a hospital, it was Camp Andy Johnson. And before that, it was the Jesse D. Bright estate. And notice over, so then you see the Ohio River, and then notice in the upper left, because the one soldier talked about, the soldier that wrote that earlier letter I referred to, is in the 9th Pennsylvania Cav, and he refers in his letter to the Louisville Water Works. He calls it the Louisville Water Plant or something like that. But that's where the hospital was, and you can see how easy it would be for boats to come up the river. Here's a view from sort of the Louisville side, the Kentucky side. So you see again where the hospital would have been. And then notice I put the military cemetery. We know for a fact that the baseball parks, what are now, the baseball, it's been there for quite a while now, but all those baseball diamonds over there, underneath those baseball diamonds was the military cemetery that the federal government established to bury soldiers from Jefferson General Hospital. So it'd be nice if we had a marker over there. The original purchase to establish Jefferson Hospital, from an article in the Indiana State Sentinel in '63, says that the government purchased 120 acres of land, a short distance just north of Jeffersonville, for the purpose of erecting an extensive hospital for our sick and wounded. And then the New Albany Ledger, a couple years later, I pulled this information out. I think the headline simply said government buildings and improvements at Jeffersonville. And I'm just summarizing here. It's a lengthy article on the construction of the hospital and other buildings. And Jeffersonville Hospital, it is said at that point, Jefferson Hospital will accommodate 2,000 soldiers at one time. The entire structure cost $290,000. And so in today's money, that's just under $3 million. And in comparison, Camp Joe Holt Hospital was erected for 110. So about almost a third. And that was able to accommodate 1,000 patients. And that same article lists numerous other structures that were built in Jeffersonville for government purposes and their cost. Well, here's the answer to the question: why was it so close to the river? The federal government used it to bring sick and wounded soldiers, particularly mostly from Nashville. And it would take them 5 days by steamer to be brought from Nashville. Nashville was a major military hospital system. The federal Army captured and occupied Nashville in February of '62. February '62. It was right after Fort Donelson. U.S. General Grant, unconditional surrender Grant, captured Forts Henry and Donelson, and right after that he makes his way to Nashville. And at that time, Nashville was a Confederate stronghold. But when they learned that Grant was on his way to Nashville, all the Confederates fled out of Nashville, and the Federals occupied Nashville for the rest of the war and established a major military system there in Nashville. And so a lot of boats, like the U.S. Red Rover, would bring patients, oftentimes hundreds and hundreds at a time, even closer to 1,000. This is an interior view of a Civil War hospital, thought to be the Red Rover, showing how it was set up with, as you can see, the cots with the soldiers aboard the steamer, the hospital ship. So where is the present day site for Jefferson General Hospital? There it is. So the Masonic Lodge that you can see today, right over there near in what is now or what was Port Fulton. This is the view facing east of the lodge, and you can, so to the right out here is the Ohio River, but I'm going to show you a couple more views. So here's now the view facing south. We're facing Nashville basically, and you can see the river. It's a little hard to see. Took this last fall, but the river is. So you see this tree. You see the tree over here on the left. These two smaller trees or bushes. And then you can see the Ohio River right there, and so that's where the present day site is. I mentioned earlier that it took 5 hours to transport the wounded from Nashville to Jeffersonville, and we know that because of this article that I found in the Evansville Daily Journal, May 5th, 62. So let's talk about the troops. I referenced earlier that there were at least 3 predominant troops or units formed in Clark County. This is an interesting slide here. Here's the number of men in the U.S. service from the 2nd District, according to the New Albany Daily Ledger for March 1863. So you see Washington counties, Harrison, Orange, Crawford, Scott, Perry, Floyd, and Clark. A total of 6,800 men roughly were in the U.S. service. Those counties are considered in the 2nd District. And so you see that Clark had 1,100 and Floyd, our neighbor here, had 905. And it's kind of interesting is Harrison and Perry have substantial numbers. They're quite compared to Clark and Floyd. Well, let's look at Clark County raised right at $40,000 in bounties for the Civil War, at the beginning of the Civil War. That's about 1.1 million today. And I already mentioned these units were formed in Jeffersonville, 49th Indiana Infantry, 12th Battery of the Light Artillery, and the 23rd Indiana Infantry, Company B. And this is a breakdown of the bounties in Clark County via the townships. So Jeffersonville Township, including the city, raised almost $40,000 for bounties, 1,500 in relief. But let's stay focused on the bounties there. Look at the next Utica Township, $10,000 in bounties. You basically multiply these numbers times anywhere between 20 to 30 times. So if it's so at $10,000, you multiply that times 20, and that in today's monies, that that would equal for Utica, that'd be $200,000. So I did my math at 20 times, and then you see some of the other townships in Clark County of how much they raised. This article from the New Albany Daily Ledger in August of 62 says that the enumeration of Clark County preparatory to the draft has been completed, and the total number of the enrolled militia of the county is 3,400. So the militia were not professional soldiers. The militia were soldiers who volunteered to stay locally and serve. And the militia were not part of the federal service. What's interesting about this is in August 62, this shows that in Clark County, there are 3,400 militia who are dedicated to protecting Clark County during the Civil War. And then it says here in this article that the number of volunteers from the county is 1,300, or 35% of the population liable to military duty. So 35% of the population of Jeffersonville served just in the U.S. service. Another 3,400 served in the militia. We'll just keep going on this. 49th Infantry, we mentioned, was raised in Jeffersonville. James Keigwin is in that unit. He's buried at Walnut Ridge. That's a picture of the siege of Vicksburg, which the 49th Indiana was involved in. And so here's a picture. Here's an ad in the New Albany Daily Ledger for the 49th Indiana. Look at the size of that bounty, a $302 bounty paid to all new recruits. And $402 if you're a veteran. So keep in mind, a soldier enlisting in the Civil War at that time only made $15 a month. So you're only talking $180 a year in terms of their regular pay. So by being offered a bounty of $300, I mean that was like another year and a half's pay. So that's a significant bounty. So the 49th assisted in digging a canal across Young's Point, and then moved for the rear of Vicksburg. It participated in the battles of Port Gibson, Champions Hill, Black River Bridge, and was involved in the siege of Vicksburg until the fall. So if you've never visited the Vicksburg National Park, it is well worth the visit. It is beautifully preserved and a magnificent park that you can go see, not too far away. In New Albany National Cemetery, I found this marker to David Miller. He was a wagoner in Company G, 49th Indiana, and he's buried there with his wife. He survived the war and died in 1913. Let's talk about the 12th Battery, Light Artillery. This battery saw major action at Shiloh, which is in Tennessee, the Siege of Corinth, Fort Negley in Nashville, Chickamauga, Lookout Mountain Battle in Nashville. These are big brand name Western theater battles that the 12th Battery, light artillery. And that picture there shows you what a light artillery looked like. This is exactly how those men would have dressed and the size of the ordnance that they're standing with. And so I mentioned that they were part of the, you see they're third on the list, Fort Negley. Fort Negley is of course in Nashville. It still is, I'll show you a picture in a second. Much of it still exists today. That is what it looked like at the time when it was, right after it was built. And you can go there today, and you got to use a little bit of your imagination, but that's the fort today. You can actually go there today at Fort Negley in Nashville and walk those ruins. This is just one shot. It's a beautiful sight there on top of the hill. The 23rd Indiana Infantry is, as I mentioned, an infantry unit that is formed in Jeffersonville. It's recruited in New Albany, and they go to camp at Camp Noble in New Albany. But all of Company B, the first the first 100 men who formed Company B, are all from Jeffersonville. And it's important to understand that when these men, I really almost call them boys, when they enlisted into companies, they enlisted as brothers and cousins and fathers and sons. And if in this case, Company B, I can promise you, 9 out of 10 of those boys knew each other, and or probably 50 to 60% were related by blood. So it truly was a war in which brothers against brothers and cousins, but impossible, if possible, these boys tried to join the same company, especially if they're fighting for the Union. Or you'll find the same thing in Confederate units, where a given company will have just a multitude of brothers and cousins, and even fathers and sons. The 23rd fought at Fort Henry, which I mentioned earlier, with U.S. Grant was involved with the capture of Fort Henry. And just like the 12th Light Artillery we saw, they also fight at Shiloh. The 49th Indiana we saw earlier fought at Vicksburg, so did the 23rd. And then they also fought at Kennesaw Mountain and in the Atlanta campaign in 1864. And this is a really cool image that was recently brought back, if you will, to Southern Indiana. I believe it's at the Carnegie Center now. But a gentleman out in California, I don't know exactly how he ended up with it, but he had this image, and this is of William P. Davis, and he is the lieutenant colonel of the 23rd Indiana, and he is from New Albany. And this image now, this exact image that you see here, is now in possession of, I believe it's the Carnegie Center. One of the camps that is a significant camp that's part of the Jeffersonville, and back then Clarksville was not considered. If I have my facts right, I don't believe Clarksville was considered. Well, I'm just going to pass on that. I don't know the exact way to phrase this without probably just messing it up. So I'm just going to say that Camp Joe Holt, it was a major camp. You can see a picture of it there on the right. It becomes a major camp and a hospital that's erected, and it is an important part of the Jeffersonville story. And you can see there again, just I pull ads or anything I can from the papers that I'm reading from back then. And here's an ad for the 23rd Indiana to be recruited. They went, they were involved in Camp Joe Holt. I mentioned earlier, it cost $110,000 to build that for the hospital part of it. And it could contain 100,000 patients. Here's another picture of the barracks of Camp Joe Holt. This image is in the University of Louisville archives. So there would have been many of those structures as part of the camp. It just gives you, it's really cool to see something that has survived that shows us what Camp Joe Holt looked like. Here's an interesting fact I was not aware of. Jeffersonville also had a camp of invalid corps. Now, invalid corps means men who were so severely injured that they couldn't go during the war, that they couldn't stay in the normal infantry, in normal infantry warfare, the infantry that they experienced their injury in. So they would often come back home, if you will, and then they would join what was often just termed as the invalid corps, and they helped provide just basic safety and protection for small communities, and Jeffersonville had one. And it says that the camp for the invalid corps here in Jeffersonville was 1,000 strong. That's a very large size camp of invalid corps. We also know that there were units known as the Clark Guards. Again, these are militia. And here's an article showing that there was a serious accident. A Corporal Walker of the Clark Guards is at Camp Noble, and he was detailed with 6 men to bring back a deserter who was believed to be in Jeffersonville. While in that place, a rifled pistol loaded with a slug exploded in his pantaloons pocket. That's not pleasant. The ball entered the thigh, was extracted about 6 inches below, causing a painful and ugly wound, but not, it is believed, a dangerous one. News at 11. A cavalry company was formed, at least part of it was formed in Clark and Floyd counties, because this article in the Ledger says that a cavalry company raised in Floyd and Clark counties left Camp Noble yesterday for Indianapolis, where the cavalry regiment will at once be mustered into service. So even men serving in the cavalry were from Jeffersonville, were part of the story of Civil War Jeffersonville. Hospitals. There are, besides Camp Joe Holt and Jefferson General Hospital, which we've already mentioned, I have an entire presentation just on New Albany hospitals. And New Albany had as many as 11 hospitals when they maxed out. In November '62, at this point, they have 8. As you can see from this, this is an extract from the New Albany Daily Ledger. And they had, at that time, a total of 1,270 men convalescing in the 8 hospitals at that time. Hospital number 9 becomes Woodward Hall, and you probably recognize that. Woodward Hall stands today. That building, which used to be Woodward Hall, stands today. In Woodward Hall, in fact, that structure still stands today. Uncle Tom's Cabin was hosted and performed from Woodward Hall during the Civil War. As you can imagine, Louisville is also a major hospital system. I believe Louisville maxed out at 21 hospitals, and here's an article clip from December 62 when they had 19. And it tells you each one, it tells you exactly where they were located. And in this case, over on the right, you can see this from the expressway, and that's the Marine Hospital. And so that's the United States Marine Hospital in what we now call Portland. That was constructed in the 1840s, and it was used as a military hospital in Louisville. So let's look at some other Civil War era structures in Jeffersonville. We're getting close to finishing up. I mentioned that there was an article, and you can see this was in January 65, and here's an article detailing the government buildings and improvements at Jeffersonville. Of course, it mentions Jefferson General Hospital, which we've already talked about, Joe Holt, the cost and how many patients. And then look at the warehouses. Warehouses constructed containing 30 million worth of supplies. That's 982 million a day. That's a lot of supplies for little bitty Jeffersonville during the Civil War. And there's just a list of, the different types of warehouses and barracks and stables and a government bakery. The government bakery was built for $40,000, which is 1.3 million today, and it could produce 100,000 loaves of bread daily. And they not only produced loaves of bread, but they produced hardtack, which was very, very hard crackers. Jeffersonville had a refugee home, government workshops, and a cemetery, which I've not been able to figure out where this is. Spring Hill United States Military Cemetery. And we'll talk about cemeteries here in a second. Here's a picture of the blacksmith shop. This was on the north side of New Market. It's a great picture. Here's the laundry, which was part of Jefferson General Hospital. And then let's talk about government business, in this case, horses. I found this article in the Ledger. It says contracts for cavalry horses awarded. It said the federal government received 10 bids for 2,000 cavalry horses. The winning bidder was Mr. Norman Laughlin of Jeffersonville, and the government paid $95.70 per horse. So Mr. Laughlin must have had, he was probably a broker. I can't imagine that he himself had that many horses, but he probably had quite a collection himself. And then he was able, as a broker, probably to work in the various counties in southern Indiana and fulfilled an order that today would be $6.3 million. That's quite a large size for a government contract. Cavalry horses were in constant demand by both the Federals and the Confederates during the Civil War. Let's see, just to save time, this is an article from the New Albany Daily Ledger that just talks about the growth of Jeffersonville during the time. My point simply in this is that the war gave small towns like Jeffersonville, and New Albany was much larger, but small towns and smaller cities, it really infused a lot of dollars into these towns, depending on what kind of products, if you will, that town or city could supply. So thanks to especially people like Pam Peters, we know that there were refugee camps in southern Indiana and across the river in Jeffersonville and New Albany. And the war, generated just thousands and thousands of in some cases, whites who were refugees of war, and of course, many black citizens and slaves and what have you became refugees of war. And this picture is, I can't even imagine, just really, you can see the Ohio River there at the top, and these refugees are just, doing their best to literally keep warm during the night, and they would often just camp right on the banks of the Ohio River in Jeffersonville, Clarksville, what is today's Clarksville, and New Albany. And so here's a picture from Frank Leslie's illustrated newspaper, October 62. As we get ready to wrap this up, you can find lots of Civil War soldiers, even, and particularly even Jeffersonville soldiers that were from Jeffersonville in nearby cemeteries from Memorial Colston, what is known as Memorial Park or Colston Park, the Memorial Field near Park Street that mentioned earlier, which was part of the Jefferson General Hospital, the New Albany National Cemetery, which is what this shot is on this slide, Walnut Ridge, Cave Hill, Zachary Taylor, and I'm sure there are many more, but those are some of the more prominent ones. And so here's the Colston Park marker. It's behind the residential lofts on Mulberry today. And this marker says that there were 335 graves and from all kinds of wars, many different wars, not just the Civil War, that were buried at this site. But several hundred of them were Civil War soldiers. But they even included Revolutionary War, War of 1812, and Mexican War. Here's Memorial Park, what is now Memorial Park. I don't have enough information on just what happened. I don't know if the men that were buried over here were reinterred. I would like to think that they were. There's not much information that I've at least been able to find helping us understand where they went or if they're even still there. I referenced earlier the New Albany National Cemetery. There are 2,800 military burials there. It was sort of beautified by Dr. Fry during the Civil War, and it even includes some buried U.S. colored troops, which were black soldiers that fought for the federal government. And then these are just many different slides. I just wanted to simply show you that I've gone through there and just picked out, many of these soldiers. I looked up the records and found out, this one was from Jeffersonville. Frank Zeller, Charles Williams fought at Stones River, Chickamauga. He dies of disease in January '65. He's from Jeffersonville. And just on and on. Emory Hackett. He died of disease at Jeffersonville and was in the 2nd Michigan Cav. Just on and on. Hiram Palmer, Mason Barber, Theodore Hansen. He died 2 weeks. He was wounded at Peachtree Creek. He dies 2 weeks later. So I just have a lot of those were all markers from New Albany National Cemetery. And Walnut Ridge, I mentioned earlier, James Kigwin is buried there, probably many other 49th Indiana. Cave Hill Cemetery, there are just hundreds and hundreds of markers. I haven't gone over there extensively to identify just Jeffersonville soldiers yet, but I did want to let you know on September 15th, there's a lecture there about the Perryville battlefield, and many of the soldiers, especially from New Albany, were part of the Perryville action, Perryville battlefield. It's not too far away. It's a great visit there. And on the 25th, there's a Cave Hill Civil War golf cart tour of the Civil War. That'd be great to check out both of those if you have a chance. Zachary Taylor National Cemetery. Again, you're going to find soldiers from many wars, including Jeffersonville soldiers. Soldiers from Jeffersonville buried there from the Civil War. So for further research, and the last slide here is my name is Kraig McNutt. You can reach out to me through Yahoo at Telling History at Yahoo. And don't forget, your local libraries, including Jeffersonville Public Library and Floyd New Albany Public Library over here. The Filson Historical Society in Louisville is amazing with what they have. And, I hesitate to name too many people, but, we have some great assets in the community, people like Gene Burke and Dave Barksdale. Don't forget the books by Kramer and Baird and Pam Peters' excellent book on let's see, museums. Bardstown Western Theater Museum. That's a beautiful, beautiful museum in Bardstown. If you haven't seen that, that's an amazing, museum. The Fraser History Museum is just right across the river. They have the original Old Clock Church, I think is what it's called, Second Presbyterian Church in New Albany. They have the old clock face. I don't know how they ended up with it over there at Fraser. By the way, at Bardstown Western Theater, they have a flag that flew at Jefferson General Hospital in their theater, and of course our own Carnegie Center here in New Albany. So that's it for the slides. I'm going to minimize this, and if any, well, let me make sure I can see everybody. I got to pull this up. While I'm trying to pull the screen up so I can see everybody, does anybody have any questions? I hope you were able to hear me the whole time.
Hey, Kraig.
Hey, Jim.
I'm just going to give you a piece of support because I know how many hours, I know how long this took, and I know how many hours that we spent just playing with this and how many more hours you did for the people to understand that this could have gone for about 2 days.
Yeah, it really could have. Yep. Yeah, I've done, like say, similar study and research on New Albany and then sort of like Southern Indiana in general. And, all told, all of those presentations total, hundreds and hundreds of slides. So I appreciate y'all bearing with me because that's a lot of information. But I definitely wanted to try and give you as much as I could in as short amount of time as possible. But so anybody have any questions before we wrap up? Besides,
Kraig, I had a comment.
yeah.
I learned something tonight. I've always thought of the 23rd Regiment as a New Albany regiment, but in fact, it was a Jeffersonville regiment that recruited in New Albany. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. That's what's interesting about, the gentleman that I referenced. I just lost his name in my slide of his image that came back, a lieutenant colonel from New Albany.
Mm-hmm.
So as best I can tell, it was Company B that was formed in Jeffersonville.
Okay.
And, again, all of those boys being from Jeffersonville. And then it looks like they camped in Camp Noble as opposed to Camp Joe Holt. I believe. I could double check my information.
Yeah. Anyway, thank
Davis. Lieutenant Davis. Yeah.
you.
Thank you very much.
Kraig, I've got a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Stephen.
Okay. I was just surprised that it seems that nobody's ever gotten to the truth of the matter of whatever happened to those guys that were buried in a couple of places in Jeffersonville that have now been under development. I mean, is there any thread of a clue as to whether they actually were moved or just what happened to them? We'd be a lot more careful today if we ran into, say, an Indian cemetery or something, but it looks like
you're right. I mean,
the Civil War.
I just can't find much at all that, there's one article, there's a genealogist, I apologize, I don't know her name, but I ran into her during my research. I should have had her on that screen for further research, but she is the one that sort of tipped me off that there were even soldiers at Memorial Park. And then I was able to confirm that because in my research, I discovered it was very common for when a hospital was established, for a military cemetery, obviously, just to be, what we would consider a block or two away. So, but yeah, it's just such a shame that, I've just not been able to find, much of anything, which is very unfortunate. So the odd thing is I played there from age 13 to 15 at Memorial Park. And I can't believe that I was playing on the very, basically a military cemetery.
Well, thank you for your excellent presentation.
Yes, you're welcome.
Thank you, Craig, and thank you all for coming. So we'll sign off now.
All right.
Okay.
Y'all can email me if you have any questions.
I know where to find you, Craig.
Thanks again, Craig.
Yes. Good
Yes,
to see you, Dr.
thanks.
Peters. Yeah, you too, Pam. Good to see everybody.
See you.
Yeah.
Very interesting.